Welcome to the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast, hosted by David Mandell, an attorney, author, and OJM Group partner. We share real-world financial lessons from physicians and insights from experts to impact your bottom line. Check the show notes to get a free copy of our book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Now, over to David.
Hello, this is Dave Mandell, host of the podcast. Got a terrific guest today. Let me tell you about Dr. Jack Bert, and then we're going to start. He's here, but I want to tell you about his bio. He's got a very impressive bio, which we're going to link to in the show notes for the full bio, but I'm going to kind of summarize or give you the highlights here. So Jack is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon and knee and shoulder specialist. He has published over 73 articles and 22 book chapters and has presented at over 300 lectures nationally and internationally. He has taught multiple academic courses for the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons and for the 6,000-member Arthroscopy Association of North America, where he previously served as president. Jack is an adjunct clinical professor emeritus at the University of Minnesota School of Medicine, and he's given grand rounds at a very long list of top universities. Again, check out the full bio for that. He served on the board of directors of the Retired NFL Players Association. We're going to chat a little bit about that. He's been a consultant to multiple orthopedic companies, and we're going to cover that in industry as well. And he's involved now with a company that links employers directly with orthopedic providers, and I want to hear more about that as well. So with that, Jack, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, David. Happy to be here.
Yeah. You and I have spoken at conferences together and worked on some courses and curriculums, and I think this is just more of education. That's how people are getting it today. So I appreciate you being here. So I ask all physicians the same question now for 6 seasons when they come on. Where are you from originally? What attracted you to medicine? And in general, and orthopedics in particular?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I grew up in the north side of Chicago. My oldest brother was an orthopedic surgeon, spine surgeon out in Oregon, who recently retired. Went to Northwestern undergrad and then went out east for medical school and finished up my training at the Mayo Clinic, and I've been in St. Paul, Minnesota ever since. We started a very small group back in the late 70s, early 80s. Had the first outpatient ambulatory surgery center in St. Paul, Minnesota. In fact, in the state of Minnesota back in 1990, and had some interesting experiences with that early on. And we built a group up about 5 people up to 27 by the time I retired, which is now 55, and in multiple locations throughout the Twin City area.
Yeah, and we're going to get into some of that. When you started in medicine, was there, to get into orthopedics, was it something that you been an athlete and this is something you had been injured, or you'd like experienced that kind of specialty yourself as a patient, said, hey, this is one I help others with? Was it something that you started in one area and realized, hey, I really like orthopedics more? Was it a certain person who trained you? They said, oh, wow, that person really motivated me to get excited about that specialty. What was it that got you there?
Great question. So when I was at Temple University doing my medical school training, I spent 3 months with John Lachman from the Lachman test for an anti-cruciate deficiency. And he really got me excited. And then my oldest brother had been in, was in orthopedics, and I spent time at Mayo on a rotation from medical school. And so I got excited about it from that perspective as well. I did play sports in high school, played a year at college baseball when they realized I really wasn't that good. And so then after that, I just played recreational baseball in college. And I do play sports now, a lot of golf, pickleball, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And so I still enjoy sports at this time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, pickleball, I think, is leading to a lot of business for orthopedics, but that's another...
1 million injuries last year.
Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, I've got a bunch of friends who are picking it up. I'm playing golf, and if those of you could see, if you can see this, you'll know. Yeah, I've got this.
Golfer's elbow. I see it.
Yeah. It's this, actually has been helping me, so it works.
Good.
So yeah, it's been paying off. But okay, so you trained at Mayo, sort of in your fellowship. You're still in the Twin Cities. So was your career kind of, hey, the first job I took was this small practice and we built it and I've kind of been there the entire time? And we'll start talking about that. It sounds like, and I've talked before, that was the path, which is different from a lot of other folks who, start one job. It's not their lifetime job. That's most of the docs you're training. You got to tell them, your first job is not going to be your last. But for you, it sounds like some degree it has been.
Yeah, it has been. And I started as a soloist. And the one thing I noticed, I went down to visit Neil Small, who did the first in-office arthroscopy back, I believe it was 1989. I'd spent time with Lanny Johnson up in Michigan. So I had an affinity towards arthroscopic surgery. But it was intriguing to me that you could do surgery in your office. And then we decided from doing that, we would develop a full-scale ambulatory surgery center. And it was really interesting because I did the first outpatient unicompartmental knee in Minnesota, potentially maybe in the U.S., I don't know. But I remember getting reimbursed $1,200. And Lanny came over from Michigan and did it with me because he developed this particular type of implant. And I remember calling the insurance company. He said, well, we don't have a code for this. We can't pay you for it. So we're going to give you $1,200, which is pretty close to what we got for just a meniscectomy. So I quit doing them for literally 12 to 15 years as a result until everybody caught up. In other words, the insurance industry caught up and said, wait a minute, this makes more sense than paying the hospital $15,000 to do one. And I think we had charged $2,500 for the outpatient unicompartmental replacement just to see what would happen. So it's been an interesting journey for me to go from that and developing all the ancillary services for a large orthopedic group, which I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and we're gonna get there. So we're gonna talk about both ASCs and ancillaries in general and all that kind of stuff. So, in terms of starting as a solo, obviously that's pretty rare, if not extinct today for the folks coming out. Not all. My brother's a cardiologist, and certain specialties different. Orthopedics is more group oriented. But when you're talking to the fellows that you train, you've trained a lot, they're looking more at group, probably, or employed first jobs. What advice are you giving them just about like that first position? We'll get into some of the other things about negotiation and some of the others, but just choosing that first position. What do you tell folks?
Well, for one thing, there's something called an umbrella corporation. So that's what we did way back in the early 80s, where you can have, say, 5 people and you put them together under what's called an umbrella. All you need is a common provider number and a common pension plan. And so we did that. And there are groups now, massive groups around the country. Pelto's an example that has sort of umbrellaed these major 100-man groups together to form one big entity for negotiating capabilities. And so at the end of the day, that's one way to do it. If you're in a small rural town and there's 2 other guys practicing, you can form the umbrella. You can share ancillary services, set up an ASC, MRI, et cetera, physical therapy. And so you can do that, and it works real well. The only thing you have to really remember about an employed situation is you have to be very, very careful on your contracting aspect, and we can talk about that.
Yeah,
there are ways to design it where it is very favorable to be employed.
Yeah, we'll get there. On the umbrella corporation, I think that's really interesting. A couple things, comments on that. One is, you don't see it as much today because in the law, there are firms now, they have limited liability partnerships, an LLP. But before that, in the 90s, when I started my law practice, and before that, what you would see is a partnership of professional corporations.
Right.
So each lawyer would have his or her own PC, and there'd be a partnership between all of them. And I have seen some medical practices like that, but not just in orthopedics, but I saw a very large anesthesiology practice like that. And, from my perspective, the benefit of doing that is a couple. One, you mentioned, negotiation, sort of economy of scale, right? You get the power of negotiating with all of that, but you maintain some autonomy, at least in terms of your financial situation, your tax situation. You can write off what you want. It doesn't matter what Bert does. Mandell can do something different within,
Right.
his or her PC, et cetera. And, that works for, even in other businesses, nothing to do with medicine. You might have partners who have their own entity and they have a management agreement, et cetera. That concept of, having a common entity for common expenses, common revenues, et cetera, but keeping those individual spokes is a really good one. I'm glad you brought that up because it is something, not just for docs coming out or even solo, but for those who said, hey, listen, I'm comfortable in a small group, but I'd love to be part of something bigger. Well, you could do the same thing. You could have a small group. Let's say you've got two partners, you've been partners 20 years, you guys like the way you practice, et cetera. You could be a hub, you could be a spoke in the larger hub and maintain your own entity. You've probably seen that come across. Is that how your practice has grown, or is it growing all within one entity, or is it still maintaining that umbrella?
No, that's a wonderful point, David. And it's the kind of thing whereas if you wanted a Maserati and I wanted a $20,000 Chevy, you can do that through your professional corporation,
Right.
and it doesn't affect the other partners, which is one of the things. And for example, I had a defined benefit pension plan, so I put a ton of money away.
Right.
Which allowed me to have a significant amount of money when I retired. And some of the guys didn't want to do that. They had other expenses and they didn't want to do it. So that's the huge advantage, in my opinion, to doing that. Now, we did that within our group until we got so big that we did a merged practice. But some of the guys were still allowed to keep their MDPA. I kept it for 33 years because I enjoyed the ability to write off certain expenses. And, you can be aggressive or passive about it, depending upon if I have somebody like you to call and give me advice, right? And so at the end of the day, to me, it's a wonderful situation.
Yeah, no, you mean, obviously you've done this is why you're here. You have a lot of business and finance knowledge. We've talked about defined benefit plans, and it is one of those things that if I get a group of 10 docs, for them to all opt in is pretty low, right? Because everybody's got their own overhead. Everybody, one person got divorced, and one has 3 kids in college, whatever the issue is. And then there's some who are very tax oriented, very, planning oriented, and they want to take advantage of it. So that, that just tracks to, things we've talked about here on the podcast before. So that leads me into another question. And I know you've got some thoughts on this, which is, I've asked docs that come on this program, especially those, your position in your career is, as you've had financial decisions, as you've had financial management, on what, if on one end of the spectrum is totally do it yourself, like I file my own tax returns, and we've got clients who, do that, not too many. And then the other end, which is, I'm delegating, I'm trying to find the right people, and I'm delegating, whether it be the tax return or the investments or the insurance or the defined benefit plan. I'm trying to surround myself with a team. And then there's folks in the middle who some of it, I do some of it myself, and I delegate some of it. Where have you been on that spectrum, and has that changed over time?
100% having somebody smarter than me do it. If you're a busy orthopedic surgeon, the guys that try to do their own financial planning, they're not going to do well. In fact, there's several articles written about that you can. I just saw one about 6 months ago that showed that the person who uses a good financial planner has an additional 30-40% of revenue by the time they retire. And if I'm busy, if I'm working a 10 to 12 hour day, it's kind of ludicrous to think I'm going to be smart enough to know how to plan my finances. So I 100% delegate.
Yeah.
And I regretted it at all.
Yeah. So, obviously, we're in this business, and we've got, and it's in our books. There's a Morningstar, study, there's a Vanguard study. I think there's a newer one that all basically point to those who've used, professionals have some, 1 or 2% cumulative return, which over a long career is a big number. If you're talking about a study that's for physicians, I want to follow up with you after we stop recording, because that'd be something I'd love to see. And I think, we'd love to, show it to others, because it obviously, it's even more specific. And I agree with you. I brought up this point, and obviously I do this myself. Obviously, when it comes to medicine, there's no there's not even a choice. But even in like I have a company I've talked about on this podcast before outside of OJM that is with 2 orthopedic surgeons. And, could I have done the LLC for us? Yes, but it just didn't make sense. We paid a lawyer. That's a friend of ours, sure, gave us a good fee, yes. But, same thing, my mother just needed to do estate planning. Could I have done it? Yes, I could have, but it's just I'd rather pay an expert who does it all day long because I know enough to be dangerous on this stuff, but I'm not doing it every day. So I just don't even want the headache of it. Never mind, just saving a couple bucks. So, I employ this myself. I'm not just saying this because I want docs to, hire a firm like ours.
Right. Understood.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah. And you're laughing. So you get what I'm saying. So let's shift a little bit now to industry. Okay. You've worked with industry for, a lot of your career. Why don't you tell us a bit about the kinds of things you've been involved in. And then I want to follow up after you've told us what you've done, the things you've learned. But just tell us some of the things you've been involved with over the years vis-a-vis industry.
Yeah, I worked with 4 different implant companies and an arthroscopy company. I developed a surgical tool for cutting the meniscus way back in the 80s, published it in 1989 in the Journal of Arthroscopy. And then I helped a couple companies with tibial implants. And I was fortunate enough to travel around the world doing surgery, Asia and Europe especially, and which was really a kick for me to do that. But the bottom line is industry's changed dramatically since then because we used to get a percentage of the sales of a particular product. Now you're lucky to get a percent, and with some of the recent litigation that's occurred with some really well-known people around the country, it's even gotten worse. And so at the end of the day, if you're going to work with industry, make sure that you have a patent, number one. Make sure that you have an idea that if you're going to share it with a company, make sure that you've had just a really good healthcare attorney look at the contract, because there's been more stolen ideas over the last decade. I could go on and on about this, literally, for guys from the Arthroscopy Association who go up to companies and say, I've got this idea for this. Next thing you know, it's being fabricated, and they don't receive any revenue from it. So it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
The bottom line is, if you've got an idea, I would try to patent it. And if you've got a contract, make sure you got a healthcare attorney who's experienced look at it, or a good contract attorney.
Yeah, someone who's has experience. Again, this is what we're just talking about, just delegating, not just any, and not even, I would say, not even a contract attorney, an attorney who has some experience with industry contracts, orthopedics, or, at least medical contracts, because, they all have their own, not only what does it say, when you're hiring a lawyer, we've had lawyers on here before a lot, you're not just hiring them to say, this is, tell me what it says. Ideally, they have the experience to say, there's some things missing here, or there's some things out there I know in the industry that I've seen, and your number is too low, right? It's not just explaining what's there, but it's actually advocating and giving you some ability to negotiate and do better than, their first presentation of a draft.
Sure.
The first presentation is always going to be, certainly more in their
favor
than not.
Yeah.
You mentioned the patent. That's obviously the gold standard, but that takes a fair amount of investment.
Yes.
And, not just in time and money, and more time, because it's not like you just get the patent right away. You have to find
right. It's true.
And all that kind of stuff. They have to do see if there's competing patents and all of that kind of thing. In the interim, if you've got the idea, let's say you've got the idea, things like creating your own prototype, or paying for some fabrication, and maybe some non-disclosures if you're going to discuss it with anybody, to see if there's real interest here to move forward. Those are some of the things you've seen or been talking to docs about.
Yeah, absolutely. The non-disclosures I have seen, though, be a problem, because the argument can be made that, well, you didn't disclose quite all of it, or this part of it you didn't disclose. And I've seen some litigation regarding that not work out in favor of the physician who came up with the idea. So that's my only concern there.
Yeah. It's a step, but especially if the other side is a big industry, they're going to try to poke holes and all that.
Yeah, and if they've got
but ours is just this much different. We already had this idea in the pipeline, and so it wasn't really yours. You didn't add that much. I get it. I understand. That makes sense. That is not surprising that you mentioned that. So in the bio, I mentioned this Retired NFL Players Association. I know before we talked, you said, well, I'm not really sure people be that interested because it wasn't as successful as we hoped. But I said to you, I want to talk about it, just because of that. I mean, certainly it's interesting. People, or NFL fans might just be interested in general, but this isn't all just about success stories on this podcast, right? Because anybody who's an entrepreneur, anybody who's a business person, nobody hits I'll use baseball now. Nobody's batting 1,000, right? So we want to know about things that we had good intentions for, but it just didn't work out. And maybe there's a lesson there or a red flag or something that if I had to do it again, I would do X, not Y. So tell us about what is the NFL, Retired NFL Players Association. How did you get involved? What was the goal? And then maybe what came short of it?
Yeah, so about 25 years ago, I was involved with an attorney in Minneapolis who was close friends with Carl Eller and Alan Page, who became a Supreme Court justice in Minnesota. Yeah. And they were part of what we call the Purple People Eaters back in the 60s with Vikings who have never won a Super Bowl. They've been to 4 and lost all 4. So anyway, they asked me if I'd be willing to sit on their board. So I had the very good fortune of spending about 15 years with those guys and going to lunches every 6 months. And I just sat back and listened. The sadness of that whole situation is we tried to set up doctors around the country to see these guys. They all had horrible knees, especially to see them at no cost, because the pension plan for Carl Eller and Alan Page, 2 Hall of Famers, is $2,000 a month. What is it? A $13 billion industry. And so it was just sad. And we talk about stuff like, how long does an average NFL player play for? And this is my last lunch with them since they retired from it was 4 years ago. It was about 3.5 years, which I think was ludicrous because I thought it was much longer than that. But the bottom line is that these guys are super banged up. They all have severe orthopedic issues. And we did some things before the Super Bowl. We'd go and have a meeting with all these guys, and I'd talk about arthritis in the knee, what you can do about it, injectables, and then total knees. And it was a lot of fun for me. It really was.
And I assume this continues. And hopefully, again, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but I think I have seen that maybe these pensions are better now, that there is some improvement because, again, you see some NFL Hall of Famers and they're become homeless.
Yeah.
They literally have no assets, right?
Right.
It's like you said, it's such a lucrative business that there's got to be dollars for these folks, right? Mm-hmm. And especially for their healthcare, if anything, and then there's the CTE and all that stuff, which is on the neurology side. But I assume the group continues and without you, and they're hopefully they're making more progress.
Yeah, it has continued. You made. Yeah, the CTE. So I was in Boston at the university giving a talk, and I was fortunate enough to get the lecture on CTE, and it's really frightening. I've got a series of slides that has about 160 brains on it, and with 50% atrophy of these poor guys by the time they're in their 50s. So when you hear we actually talked about this quite a bit, when you hear about all these anger situations where somebody's beating up their girlfriend when they're in their 40s, that really comes from brain atrophy, and they get these anger issues, and they're on drugs, and it's just sad. And so when you slice these brains open, which they have over 250 brains now at BU, right? The average weight of a brain is about 1,600 grams. A lot of these are 800-900. So it's just they get severe atrophy from chronic concussions.
Right. Yeah. You said Boston. I know it's Boston University. They've kind of led this. Well, hopefully they make more progress with that, and it's great that you were a part of that. So let's go back to a practice question. So you had mentioned, as we talked at the beginning, about ancillaries and the importance. And I know that's something you've lectured on and something you're very passionate about, especially with orthopedics. So tell us about orthopedics, but I also want you to, broaden just to think about, any kind of doc, because as we have people of all sorts of specialties, how important it is, ancillaries from a financial, from a business point of view, and how's that's changed over your career, and, what you're telling young docs when you're lecturing at all these associations, what you're chatting about.
Yeah, so it's almost impossible to function financially and be successful with just the revenue you glean from a clinic experience. Now, having said that, 2 months ago, one of my traveling fellows from Florida gave a lecture on the fact that if you have 2 physician assistants and 2 clinic and multiple clinic rooms, and you can see 40 to 50 patients in a day, you can actually make more money than going in the operating room with the reduced reimbursements, unless you own a portion of the ASC. And he's actually publishing that article. We're going to be talking about that at OT Hawaii in January, by the way. He's flying out to give an update on the lecture, and he's got a 3-year experience on it.
We'll talk about that conference as we wrap up, because OJM is part.
Yeah.
So that speaks to, we'll get back to ancillary, but that also speaks to another topic we've had on the podcast, which is the importance of extenders, the importance of leveraging highest and best use, delegation.
Absolutely.
We talk about in terms of financial, but
yes,
concept is in medicine too, right? I mean,
yes,
don't answer the phone. Right? There's a reason for that. And you can apply that all the way down the scale to say, hey, I'm only going to do and I can pay a PA to do that, and that's more financially efficient. So I just wanted to point that out. But that's interesting, and I'm glad you have somebody really digging into that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast. Please join us again in 2 weeks for part 2 of this episode: Innovation, Industry, and Ancillaries. Lessons from Dr. Jack Bert. The Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast is brought to you by OJM Group, a multidisciplinary wealth management firm dedicated to helping physicians build and preserve their wealth while reducing taxes. Episodes from previous seasons are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other popular platforms. Podcast listeners can get a free copy of our book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Simply text WPPOD to 844-418-1212 to request your free copy. Be sure to join David every 2 weeks for the newest episode of the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast. This podcast is being provided for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions expressed on this show by Mr. Mandell and his guests do not constitute legal, tax, or investment advice, or a recommendation of any particular security or strategy, and do not represent the opinions of the underwriters of this programming. Any information prepared from third-party sources is believed to be reliable, though its accuracy is not guaranteed. Opinions expressed in this commentary reflect subjective judgments of the speakers, based on conditions at the time of recording, and are subject to change without notice. Listeners should seek the input of their own financial, tax, and legal professionals before acting on any of the information provided.